Hey, welcome everybody to our webinar today on connecting with influencers in 2023. As is the typical case, we're going to give folks a few minutes to join. We have folks joining from all over the globe, and we'll be letting folks get out of meetings and grab a cup of water or coffee, whatever it may be. So we'll be getting started a couple of minutes past the hour. And so we'll turn on a little bit of hold music, but thank you again for joining, and we'll get started in just a little bit. Thank you. All right, we're going to have folks continue to join us as we get going this afternoon, but I wanted to thank everybody for joining me so far. This is our webinar series, Connecting with Influencers in 2023. It's a three-part influencer recruitment series. We hear a lot about tips and recommendations and sort of pain points in recruiting influencers these days. And if you're a small business or if you're a large business just getting started with influencer marketing, trying to scale up a brand ambassador program, we wanted to try to bring those insights. The exciting thing is that there's just so much to discuss that it's going to go way beyond a single webinar. So we're going to break this up into parts. I wanted to highlight again, all of these are being recorded. We have a pretty global audience. We had about 280 registrants, and more than 3/4 of those are actually all over the world. So you'll be able to share a link to this webinar to other colleagues or be able to watch that back another time. We're going to go ahead and get started today. So just introduction to myself. My name is Ryan Hilliard. I'm the GM of North America here at Hype Auditor. I worked with our marketing team to put this content together so that you as a brand or you as an agency, or if you're just getting started in influencer marketing, you have the information you need to be able to go out to the market to recruit, to be able to find creators to help drive the results that you're looking for, whether it's brand awareness or if it's driving sales. As I mentioned, this is part one of a three-part series that we're going to have. The second part will happen in 2 weeks from today. And then the following part will be 2 weeks from that day. And so over the next few weeks, just be on the lookout. We'll be sending follow-ups. But today, the primary thing that we'll be jumping into will be why building a reliable recruitment engine is critical to be able to see the growth that you want from this channel. We're going to break down the funnel for recruiting people. And then we're going to get into details around effective ways of communicating with influencers, specific tips for messaging and positioning. We'll talk a little bit about offers. And then at the end, we'll sort of set things up for where we're going to go a little bit deeper to follow. But just to give you a sneak preview, we'll be going into how to build a compelling offer to get the attention and get buy-in from creators that you don't know. And then we'll also be doing some templates and releasing here suggestions for ways to go out and recruit influencers, some best practices. And then lastly, how to build an inbound engine, which if you're a small brand, it's probably your dream, the ability to just sign on in the morning and see lots of popular influencers and creators that are very aligned with you want to promote your stuff. And so how do you go about building a successful inbound engine will be another topic that we'll be diving into. Just some housekeeping items. Feel free to go ahead and drop any questions you have directly in the chat. We'll plan to have an open Q&A at the end where you can ask as specific or as vague a question as you would like. But we'll also be able to take these questions as we're going throughout. If you've attended any webinars that we've led, or especially ones that I've led, this is a pretty dense topic in terms of I'm trying to provide a lot of content and a lot of insight, a lot of value. And so we'll be moving pretty quickly, but please don't hesitate to raise your hand if you have questions. We'll also include my email address, and you can contact me directly if you want to send your request over email. So we're going to go ahead and jump straight into it. I always like to start with why things are critical, why things are important, just to provide the right context for, okay, so somebody wants me to recruit. I just want details how to recruit. Give me the way to do it. I think it's really, really important to understand the motivations and the importance behind building a recruitment engine first, and then we'll dive into that funnel and how you go about building a humming recruitment machine. Great. So the first reason to build a recruitment engine is everything is always changing around you. The competitive landscape, especially in influencer marketing, but if you're a digital marketer, you've seen it in paid all the time. There's a direct impact on what you're doing as a result of what your competitors are doing. If your competitors invest really, really heavily in micro and mega influencers, that share of voice that they're going to capture is so much larger, and it's going to impact what you're already doing. And so you're going to have to make changes to compete. And in order to make changes and to scale within influencer marketing, you have to be able to recruit and solicit new people to that program quickly, to be able to put out content quickly, because this whole thing is a cycle, right? You can't just say, I want to go live tomorrow. You have to be able to build up this user base or this community base of influencers to be able to continue to adapt to the constant changing landscape. This, again, is super important because it will directly impact the results that you see, because your audience that is following your particular brand probably does follow other similar types of brands or adjacent brands. And they only have so much money, or they only have so much attention, right? And so if that's being captured or they're spending their money with someone else, you're going to lose that week or that day. And so that constant change is one of the most important reasons why you want to always be recruiting and have this engine really up and running. The other reason, the second of 5, is influencer performance is always changing. Your go-to creator might continue to do really, really well, but you've probably seen pops and drops from other creators that you've partnered with. You're going to see influencers that are sort of stagnating in terms of their following. Their overall growth is maybe declining even. That's going to mean that you're saturating that market. The more you're promoting your product with them, you're going to see diminishing returns from those promotions, assuming that you're promoting the same thing over and over again, because you're just reaching out to the exact same people. And so knowing that those performance changes happen, it's important to have additional people either on the bench or just being brought into the fold to offset those changes that you're going to see that you don't have complete control over when it comes to performance with your influencer marketing partners. That's reason number 2 why building a recruitment engine is really, really important. The third one, and this sometimes is overlooked because we have this vision, this dream that we find the right influencer, we partner with them. We're so strategically aligned that they'll just continue to post and the revenue will just go up all on its own. We don't really have to do anything else. We found the one and it's great. Unfortunately, the linear growth or the growth, revenue growth in influence marketing is much more linear. You put in more influencers, you see more results. Sometimes you'll find that, hey, I found a creator and they're continuing to grow and we see more and more from them. But if you want to take your revenue contribution or your engagement contribution or your growth and awareness up tenfold, chances are you need to work with tenfold more influencers, right? If you're just expecting normal types of results. And so being able to scale this channel up, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, influencers seemed pretty efficient last year, we'd love to invest a little bit more. You can't just turn that switch on. You have to go out and you have to recruit, you have to find new people. And so having an engine, a process that you can easily follow, we've got these people ready to go. We've got this already going. We're able to identify, or we've already identified people for different periods in the year, and we can just ramp them up now, and we can continue to see that revenue growth. That's something that's really, really critical and sort of underlining the importance for getting more out of influencer marketing over time. The fourth reason is having this active bench for when you need to ramp up seasonally, right? So influencer marketing is like any sort of paid channel, any sort of earned channel. Everything increases when it's that seasonal time of year. If you sell mattresses, it's those secondary holidays. Memorial Day is huge. How do I ramp up for Memorial Day? I need to have an active bench of influencers ready to go months in advance so that we can just simply go up like a campaign, like a paid ads campaign where you can just increase the bids. You need to be prepared. Similarly, if it's the holidays time of year, if it's November, December, if you're trying to ramp up for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you need to have that bench of influencers ready to go because they're going to be hearing from lots of other brands that have similar audiences that could be really, really engaging. And you might just lose those slots on their calendar, that inability to even connect with them because there's so much going on. And so having that active bench to be able to scale up for those seasonal periods is really, really essential. And then the last reason, and this is the operational value of building a reliable recruitment engine, is that turning it into a process means that you can drop new people from your team in and it can just take off. We're not hyper dependent on one person that's just really good at finding influencers and connecting with them. Being able to do it year round means that you're able to sort of drop in new team members and continue to see that scale that you're looking for, maybe even further, right? You get to see more output. And so there's a lot of value in that process. Whereas we see it with brands and agencies that we work with. If you're picking up influencer marketing for a 2-month period and then you're putting it back down, when they come back a year later, the whole dynamic and landscape has changed. And that ramp up period isn't as seamless as they would like it to be. And that's where there can be this value of constantly thinking about how can I find creators that are relevant to me, right? How can I make sure that I'm continuing to connect with people for 2 months out, for 3 months out, so I can prepare and be planning for this process. So all of those reasons are why building a reliable recruitment engine is important, right? And so this is going to transition us into, so how do we go about recruiting these people in the first place? But again, it's really, really important to have this buy-in. If you're trying to sell, like scaling your influencer marketing initiatives internally, you want to underline these reasons to senior management or to your CFO. This is why we need to do this, because we're not going to be able to just turn on the switch, right? We've got to be able to do this in a sort of planned, organized way. And the best way is to have this engine sort of always humming. So when we think about influencer recruitment, how do I find influencers? How do I connect with influencers? There's a couple of things to really keep in mind. Influencer recruitment is a funnel. It's a sales funnel. And if you're a marketer and you thought, I'm going to be in marketing, I can get away from sales, unfortunately, you cannot, right? There's always going to be drop off at different stages in this funnel. Even if you find the perfect influencer, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a 100% hit rate where I reach out to one person, we just connect, and it's just super easy. You're going to have drop off at all of these different stages, whether it's an outbound message, whether it's an email recruitment or solicitation, or it's just some inbound inquiry. You're always going to see people fall out of the funnel because they get busy, they don't see your messages, your responses or your offers don't resonate. And so when you're recruiting, you really want to take into this idea that if I want one influencer, one really, really strong influencer, I need to think about partnering with like 4 in terms of outreach, because they're, as I'm going through this process, even if I connect with 4, one's going to have a problem with the offer, one's not going to agree to the timeline, and I'm going to be left with 1 at the end of the day. And so if I really want 4 to go live, I need to be thinking about 16, or I need to be thinking about 20. And that's, once you start to multiply those numbers because of that drop off, you begin to see how critical it is to turn recruitment into more of a science, a reliable sort of math problem than just an art, where I find the magical person, I send them one DM and it works. It doesn't really operate that way in most cases. And so it's really, really important to turn it into a reliable machine process. So here's the influencer outreach funnel that we came up with. At each of these stages, again, there's going to be drop off, whether you're finding influencers, you're choosing, you're negotiating with your team who you want to work with, reaching out to them, hearing back from them, discussing offers. All of these things represent different points of drop off and disconnect. And so one of the things we're going to go into today is we're going to be going through different steps within this funnel down to that negotiate point. For how do you craft messaging? How do you get a hold of an influencer at an effective rate? How do you deliver that message? And how do you do it at scale so that you're able to get the number of influencers you want to drive the revenue that you're hoping to achieve? It's important to note that you do want to try to, over time, minimize those drop-off stages. So if you see I have a 30% drop-off from the influencer replies to agreeing to my offer, over time, you'll want to try to make that a little bit better by figuring out who is the right fit. How can I look for potential red flags with this creator? But that only comes from experience. Trying to optimize early, trying to have a perfect connect rate isn't going to happen. And so you need to be able to get comfortable with reaching out at scale, doing the process, getting a little bit manual, and then over time you'll build up some experience and you'll get really, really efficient. And ideally, you get to the point where I've seen really successful brands where they have different tiers even of types of influencers, where they'll have expected connect rates of certain levels and certain engagement rates for certain types of influencers or certain categories of influencers than others. Some might be more exploratory, and we're okay with it being a little bit different, but they have that true understanding of the process, similar to how you would think about any other paid channel. So at the core of it, there's 2 real ways to connect with influencers. There's inbound and then there's outbound. So inbound is great. We're going to dive into how to build an inbound recruitment engine in our 3rd part of this series. But there's a lot of benefits to doing this, and everybody should be thinking about both, right? The ideal scenario is you're doing both of these things. But inbound is when people are coming to you because you have payouts for sales that they drive. You have dedicated landing pages for people to come in. Hey, I would love to promote your product. I'd love to be a part of your brand ambassador program. Maybe you're even sending out emails to certain folks. Those are ways that you're trying to get people to come to you, sort of soliciting response from a mass audience. And then you're going to get folks that raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested. There's a lot of benefits to this. And again, we'll dive really deep into building an outbound engine and how do you make that really work in a few weeks. But the pros of inbound are, right, they're just coming to you. And you can just sort of file them away for later. You can send them products. You can really sort of control the sales process a bit more. But there are some downsides, right? The quality control is not really there. Anybody is going to reach out to a really nice hotel resort and say, hey, I'd love to take pictures and have a free stay for the week. Can you put me up, right? And so it becomes a job for the brand to really understand who makes sense to reach out to and who doesn't. And you are at a whim of control in terms of the volume. If you have a very, very popular product, you might come in and say, I have 15 more requests every single day. I've got all of these requests. How can I shut it off? Inbound, you have to then remove any sort of inbound entry. You just have less control over that sort of volume coming from the spigot. For outbound, what we're going to be primarily focusing on when we're thinking about crafting messages is that cold outreach. Warm outreach, if somebody's pretty familiar with your brand, they've bought from you before, they subscribe to your newsletter, it is easier to break through the noise because they're kind of an active, engaged customer or user. Agency relationships too. They've got these facilitated, coordinated relationships with quality individuals. They're going to have a really, really high rate of connecting because they know what's going to map to the influencer, and to the brand. So we're not going to be focusing as much on that today because those are pretty easy to accomplish. So these messaging things that we dive into in a little bit will apply. But when we think about cold outreach, this is when you identify that creator or set of creators that look perfect, but by all intents and purposes, they have no idea who you are, right? They talk about stuff that you care about. Their audience is the group of folks that you want to engage with, but they don't really know who your brand is. Now, if you're working at a larger brand, if you're working at a large manufacturer, or you have your own storefront, hundreds of them across the country, you're not going to have as many cold people as maybe you would think, because most folks are going to be familiar with you. And so that outreach is going to be more warm. But if you're a small business or you're a startup and you're really trying to break into a space, this is really where you're going to wind up. You're going to want to figure out, how can I effectively reach out to people who don't know who I am? How can I present that, hey, we really should work together. We really think about things the same way. And how do we scale that up? So it's just some of the pros and cons of outlines, because I like to make sure that we're covering all of the same bases when we're comparing different types of things. The cons are, it takes manual effort, right? There are tools like Hype Auditor that can really streamline that outreach and sequencing of emails and trying to do that, but you still have to find folks that you would like. Now the pros, and this is just like any other sales endeavor, you have complete control of who you want to reach out to. You don't have to worry about, is this person actually have no following at all and they're really, really tiny. You can use tools like Hype Auditor to say, I want people of this size. I want the audience to be real and authentic. I want them to be talking about this content, and I just choose them. And I go out and try to follow up with them. You have complete control of the quantity and how you ramp that up. Now, there is going to be some lag when you're doing that outreach, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit. But as you're doing outreach, you're going to be wanting to plan ahead, because there's going to be sort of a purchase cycle, as it were, where it's going to take at least a week to get a hold of them, at least a week to negotiate, and then at least 2 weeks for content. And so now we're talking about a month, right? And so if we want to ramp up for some specific period, it could be that you need to plan months in advance, but you still have complete control over the quantity. You could be thinking about the holidays. I know it's not even June yet, but you could be thinking about the holiday season now, doing your recruitment now, and getting things all set up. And that's all within your control with Outbound. You control that whole process. So let's dive a little bit deeper into how we're going to now improve that outreach performance at each stage. As we move to the next slide, just a note, I got a question from Cheyenne. We will be sharing a copy of this webinar following the completion of it. We'll send out a link to this live stream, and then we'll also be including more details to come on the second and the third follow-up in this series that we have. So no worries there. You'll be able to access it on YouTube directly. So we want to improve outreach at each stage. We want to become more and more effective as we're reaching out to folks. And so it's going to start initially with finding the right influencers. Now, this isn't a finding influencers webinar, so this is going to be a very, very limited touch base. You can see I even have a note. If you want some tips and tricks and understanding of how to find and choose influencers, we've got great webinars that you can watch on demand for that. But choosing the right influencer is going to impact your ability to connect with them, your ability to get a response back. Even if you have tremendous messaging, if they're completely misaligned, you just might not be able to connect with them. If they're humongous and you're a brand that just started yesterday, you're probably not going to find that success. So it is important when choosing to evaluate, hey, how effective is this outreach really going to be based off of where we are and where that creator is. So now let's get into the meat of this webinar. How do we craft effective messages for outreach? So we're going to be focusing in this area of building messages, sort of taking apart different pieces of messages. What's good? What's bad? How do you efficiently connect with folks? We'll talk a little bit about replying and managing those responses that you get. And then we're going to end for the day, and we'll be diving into building a compelling offer, managing gifting versus fixed amounts versus a blend of the both or a percentage. We'll be talking about that as we go further into our series in sort of 2 of 3. But let's really focus here on crafting messages. So there's three primary ways to connect with a creator. You can email them. A lot of times they have their emails listed publicly. If they're trying to make money, if they're trying to monetize this as a business, they have an email listed. You can direct message them on the platform, or you can try to work with them through a marketplace, an influencer marketing marketplace where it's like, we signed up, you signed up, now let's try to connect with them. So let's break down how these different areas interact. And if the question is which one is better, we'll try to narrow in on which one might make the most sense in most cases, right? So if we were to think about email, I alluded to this before, but most creators that want to make money by promoting different brands are going to list an email. It might be an email to a talent agent. It might be a personal email. It might be an email to an inbox that they just monitor. But getting at email is really not that difficult. It is something that's publicly listed, right? Even Hypeauto, we make it easy for you to filter for show me creators that have emails that basically show that they want to work with brands. You do have to overcome the typical email noise, right? If you work in marketing, you get emails from salespeople all the time, right? About, hey, this, that will improve your conversion rate. And so there's that typical noise. And so what we're going to do after this is we're going to break down how do you create a message that breaks through that noise, that gets people's attention. But that is a con here that you do have to manage working through an inbox. For direct messaging, you can usually reach out to just about any influencer as well. And sometimes they'll even encourage brands to reach out over direct messaging. The one downside here is there's even more noise. Every single person is messaging this creator on social media. Maybe they're just sharing another post. Maybe they're sending specific types of comments that have nothing to do with commercial intent, right? So there's a lot more noise that you're going to be facing in direct messaging, but it is another avenue for getting in front of folks. And a lot of what we'll talk about tied to email will apply to direct messages as well. And then the last one is connecting over a marketplace or tool. This has its pros and its cons, right? It's great that there are marketplaces. There are places where brands and creators are trying to come together. The downside is that they're all sort of independent, right? And so if there's a dozen or 2 or 3 dozen different networks, a creator is going to subscribe to all of them. And so then in order to manage that communication, if it's directly within the platform and not over email, the expectation is they have to log into all of them. Well, that's not going to happen, right? They're going to pick and choose the ones that are most effective. And so you want to make sure that you're not hitching yourself to they're exclusively on this network, because chances are they are not, just as you as a brand are probably not. You're probably in more places. And so I would typically steer people more towards email is one of the most effective ways, or even if they put out a phone number or an email for an agent to get at a person that wants to show some commercial activities on their feeds or do commercial posts. Direct message can be good as well, but again, it's very, very noisy. And so we typically would recommend, and we've seen it most effective, working with email. And this, again, is sort of separate. If you're working through an agency or if you have warm relationships from people coming inbound, this would be that outbound front. So we're going to dive into how to write an effective email, subject line, content, why, how you position the offer. I did have a question that came in around, will we also send a PDF down the link of the presentation? Typically, we just send a recording, but we probably can. I'm going to send, I'll show my email at the end of this. And if you want to request it, you can request a copy of the presentation over PDF. So let's think about crafting messages. This will be sort of the last thing that we're diving really deep into today. And then we'll be going a little bit further over the next few weeks. Messages are really comprised of 4 parts, right? Especially if it's over email. You've got your subject, you've got an offer, you've got a why. Why am I reaching out to you at all? And then a concise call to action. This is not dissimilar to crafting email marketing messages, to doing your own sales outreach. Those are the most important pieces. And then the catalyst to success is frequency. There is no perfect way to write a message where it gets a 100% response rate. All you're aiming for is good. And then frequency will help you get in front of people. Now, we can show you the difference between good and not so good, and we'll dive into that here in a second. But I don't want people to miss that how often you're sending messages and how deliberately you're waving at an influencer by trying to connect with them in many places. That is what's going to be more effective than a single magic email, no matter how magical it looks. So crafting subject lines. This is where you get your sort of notes out and the nitty gritty. But I always liked as a marketer where we can take this sort of tactical, what do I do with this? Give me a good example. So when you're thinking about a subject line in email, the goal is to get attention. We are trying to sell through the click to the email. We're not trying to sell them on the offer. We're not trying to get them to agree to the content. We are trying to get them to take that first step of email looks interesting, I'm going to engage, right? Especially if a creator is unfamiliar with your brand, and the way that you would be able to evaluate that is if they're a micro-sized creator, they've got less than 50,000 followers, and you're a small business, chances are you probably aren't familiar with each other. And so getting that attention is very, very important. Very tactically, 7 words or less. Avoid truncating, acknowledge that they're probably opening this email on their phone. And so that's where they're going to see the subject line. That's where it's going to have to be interesting. But you want it to be concise and something that gets their attention. And I have a last bullet here where you're going to hear common best practices from email marketing groups of like, always do this. Keep in mind that if you're saying offer for you, right, and everybody's doing it, you're not getting any attention. Everybody just says offer. And so they're going to be picking the email domain that looks the most interesting more than anything else. And so you want to be crafting good, concise subject lines that draw attention. Emojis work great. If you're sending emojis, you might have to copy them from Google as text because sometimes there are some issues if you're using a CRM with getting an emoji. But emojis are really, really effective ways to break through the noise. Just think about your own email inbox. You can get clever with them. You can add personality. Dropping in their name, your company can be a way to try to draw that attention, but really using something visual is a great way to capture attention. Early access, giving somebody something that people don't have that they're going to get to talk about. Everybody loves that. If you work in PR, you know you love exclusives, right? Or if you work with a PR agency, everybody loves exclusives. Everybody loves something early. And so that's a great way to say, hey, this is a little bit different than just promote the product that has already been out there. Alluding to things that their audience will love or specific things that they've talked about can also be other ways of getting in front of them, showing them that you're putting forth some effort to personalize this, that it's not just some blast that's the same to everybody. Because these creators do want to feel like what I'm doing is unique and special, and you are acknowledging that, right? It could be very similar to other things, but that's the feeling that you want to convey. Offer for you, free product giveaway. Those things are not compelling. They get them every single day. And if they get enough of them from brands that they don't want to work with, they just begin to gloss over, right? And so try to focus on short, concise things that show your personality, that show that you genuinely sort of care about what this person is doing. The next piece for that outreach is a clear offer. What are you hoping to do with this partnership? What are you going to provide? What are you looking for in return? Now, this isn't your brief. This isn't everything, right? The goal is once they've opened that email, how do we get them to take that next call to action, which is either clicking through to somewhere or replying. So we need it to be a very, very short, concise, specific message to give them some reason to go, I'm going to hit reply, or I'm going to click this button and I'm going to review their proposal because it looks like it could be interesting. So avoid vague, avoid sort of like we think, we might, maybe, because to them, it's like, I might want to do this and you're not even sure if you want to do that. And so very, very specific, hey, we're going to offer a fixed amount. This is what we were thinking. Spoiler, you may not wind up on that number just because they replied to $500 or $4,000 per post. It doesn't mean that that's where they're going to be. You're just trying to start that conversation. So again, you're thinking of it as a funnel. We want to get people from open to click through or reply. And then we'll figure out the negotiations as we go a little bit further. So good offer text. We'd like to offer you this specific amount for this specific purpose. I probably should have even included this on this network. Plus, we will give you 15% of commission on orders. We're also willing to give you a discount code for your followers. You know, we don't do discounts, right? We need to give them some reason why this is a valuable offer for them to promote to their audience, not just, hey, we're doing an offer for everybody. Here, you can go promote it. The influencer's going to think, what value am I bringing to my audience? They can go get this anywhere. Why would they click through me? They're just going to go directly to your website and get it. So you need to call those things out that are different. And you need to avoid, oh, we thought it might be nice if you post in places, we could discuss how much money. That doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel concrete. And it feels like you're putting all of the work on coming up with an idea on the creator. And unless they're very, very familiar and love your brand, they're not interested in that, because there's lots of other requests that are much more specific. And so a good, clear offer, a very, very tangible feeling is where you want to start. So after you've positioned your offer, and you can even put this a little bit above the offer if you wanted to, you need a compelling why. What are we trying to do together, right? What is the purpose of me reaching out to you? Now, if this is a scaled product giveaway to all of your existing customers, this becomes a little bit less important, right? Because, well, the purpose is we're trying to promote this, but we're reaching out to hundreds of people. And so this is where there's a little bit of a differentiation there, but I would even say that that's probably a warm prospect versus a cold prospect. But why we think that this brand partnership would be really, really good. If you want something strategic, a long-term relationship where we're working together for months and months and months, this is very, very important, because you need for the creator to imagine themselves working with you and that this being something that they enjoy doing, right? And so creators like to create. They probably do like to make money as well, but they're thinking about this of my channel and my brand. So why is this something that would benefit our brands together, right? And so you want to call that out. We have the same mission to improve people's lives through X, or we have the same idea around this. This is why we think it really makes sense. Avoid, I think that you could make us a lot of money. Some influencers might be okay with that, but in general, that's not a very compelling why. That's very you-centric. You need to be thinking about how this partnership is going to work together. And then the last thing, and this is an obvious thing, but sometimes it's overlooked because this is, oh, we're just reaching out to influencers, is you need a very, very concise call to action. What do I want you to do, and when do I want you to do it? We want to run this sale over Easter. Please reach out to us by this date. That's when we need to know. If you don't provide a sort of concrete end date, a firm, this is when it's a no-go, you're sort of leaving all the control to them, and you're just going to sit there wondering, I wonder if they're going to reach out to me. But they have no motivation or understanding that, oh, maybe I should respond 3 weeks before Easter, not just the day before Easter. And so providing something very, very specific. Here's what I want you to do. Here's when I want you to do it. If you don't, you're going to run into some issues where people might just pop in at the last minute and you're scrambling a bit. And maybe it's great that you did get that connection, but you could have prevented a lot of it just by being very, very specific with dates and expectations in the call to action. If you're using a tool like HypeAuditor, we have a button for view proposal, right? We give them that sort of the next action is to review this, right? And so that can be something that's also very, very clear what we want them to do. But you should be able to read into it and know exactly what's happening next. So we've talked about the structure of a good outreach message, and you could take a lot of that and apply it to your direct messages as well, or messages over platforms. This was mostly constructed for email. But the catalyst to your outreach being very, very successful is frequency of touches. How many times do you try? How many channels do you try? And over what time period? The general rule of thumb, and this is a sort of sales rule of thumb as well, is if you send one and you're done, you're going to get none. That's just the reality of it. Your message is not going to be that good. And it's not because people don't care. It's mostly tied to the fact that they're getting so many messages and inquiries that they just simply might not see you. They might be busy. They might be on vacation. Misconnections, not realizing, oh, I didn't realize you were reaching out. That just happens in real life. And so by upping the frequency to at least, what I would recommend is at least 5 touches, and ideally across multiple channels. So a direct message and a bunch of emails is the best way to say, like, I'm going to get them to see me. And then if they don't act on it, it's because they're not interested. But if you only send one message, it's more likely they didn't even see you, not that they're not interested. And so you really need to up the frequency, and the duration needs to be very, very confined, right? Not 5 messages over 6 months, 5 messages over 2 weeks. We need to know if this is going to happen or not. We need to show them our high intent and if they're going to act or not. And so that's a core recommendation. Your email can be okay, and this will make it effective. You could have an amazing email. If you don't get frequency right, you're not going to get responses. This is the last section we're going to cover for today, and it's pretty brief, managing replies. As I mentioned before, we'll be diving deeper into building a compelling offer, because that anatomy of an offer is important for getting responsives. But we're not going to be able to cover that today. It's just simply too much content for such a small amount of time. But managing replies. So you get a response from a creator, you should try to connect with them within an hour. I know it feels very, very small window, feels unreasonable, but other folks are getting replies as well. There's a limited share of her voice or his voice, the time window that you want to fit into. And so the quicker you reply, the greater intent that you're showing, hey, I really do want to work with you. I want to show that I'm bringing a lot to the table here. And so that's going to increase the actuality that you actually have a meeting next. If you delay and delay and delay, you reply 4 or 5 days later, they might have been interested, but you might not get a meeting now. You have to sort of stir that all back up into each other. If it's transactional as a relationship, it's pretty easy. Hey, you have any questions? We'd love for you to get started. Here's a link. If it's a larger strategic investment, your goal should be, let's talk, because you're not going to create this huge revenue fostering, value fostering relationship with a creator by sending them a couple emails and they say yes, and it just happens that way. You want to really invest that time, and don't be afraid to hop on the phone, figure out, what they're trying to do with their channel, lean into that their sort of brand, what they're trying to produce, and see if there really is good alignment here. All of that can go a long way also in helping with negotiations, which we'll talk about in our next session. So don't be afraid of that. So this is our summary slide. Feel free to drop in questions as you have them. But we dove into, for our first session of 3, 5 reasons to build a recruiting engine. Things are always changing. The growth from this channel is pretty linear. As you're adding influencers, you get more revenue. If you don't add influencers, your revenue tends to stay flat. And you need this sort of active bench for scalability and seasonality. And then there's value in other folks in your team being able to step in and run with this program if somebody, that sort of like gets hit by a bus scenario. We dove into the recruitment funnel. We talked a lot about how there's drop off at all of these stages. And you really need to keep that in mind, because if you want to connect with 30 influencers this year, you really need to be thinking about, how do I find 150? That's the safest way to get to 30. Picking 50 and saying, I hope I get the 30, that it's just very unlikely to happen unless your offer is extremely aggressive. And so you just want to build that into your plans. And then so with that, we're going to stop for questions in a second, but I just want to send a reminder to folks. We're going to be sending this out over email Thursday, April 6th, 2 weeks from today at the exact same time. We're going to be having part 2. We're going to be talking about building a compelling offer. We're going to be talking about approaches to fixed fees versus gifting versus affiliate versus all of them, pros and cons, and how do I do it and what makes the most sense. We'll also be talking a little bit about, if I have a product that costs thousands of dollars, how do I handle this, right? If I'm doing jewelry, I'm not going to send jewelry in the mail or I expect to get it back. It's just simply too expensive. How do I manage that type of situation? Or maybe I'm trying to reach out to a segment of the market that is super, super small. Maybe it's a lot of discretionary income for this specific resort. How do I find that and then make an offer that's compelling there? And then the last thing, just looking at my notes to make sure that we have it. Well, when we're talking about building this compelling offer, we'll be talking about terms. We'll be talking about negotiations. We'll be talking about content approvals and rights. how to craft all of this into something that you don't get your hopes up for a really great partnership, and then everything falls apart when the offer is presented, right? And so that's what we'll be diving into next time. And then in part 3, sort of a preview, we'll be talking about building that inbound engine. How do you, as a brand, even if you're small, start this inbound engine so you can do what some of those men's clothing companies like Sticks or the True Classic Tees, how did they do this from 0 to hundreds of millions in revenue? They were a small business when they started this effort. And so we're going to talk about how to do that inbound engine. Great. So we've got a few minutes for questions. My email is listed here. If you want to send anything, follow up. If you're requesting a PDF of this, if you could just shoot me an email, that would be a great way to make sure that we send that PDF out, or you can reply to our email when it comes out. We'll be sending along this recording. You can share with others. So I'll go through some of the questions I can see here. So one question I have from Mihaela is, a lot of emails end up in spam to creators. Any advice regarding this? So the general rule of thumb when it comes to first emails that are cold is try to avoid lots of links and lots of images. It needs to be pretty standard text. You can still do emojis. Emojis can be sort of read as text by email service providers, but you don't want to try to put everything in one place and say, if you click this, because that looks like spam, right? And so you want to be a little bit systematic about it. You want to try to see if there's some interest. Here's our offer. Are you interested? And then figure out, what that next step is. You'll have follow-ups and whatnot. Once that first email is delivered, you can include a link. Hey, here's a little bit more about our program if you want them to dive a little bit deeper. But that's the best way. If you're trying to ramp up into significant volume, try to avoid going from I'm not sending any emails to now I'm blasting my 10,000 customers all the time, because you can run into some email service provider issues. You want to do a warm-up. If you're not familiar with what a warm-up is, just search email warm-up. You'll probably see something from SendGrid or a tool like that. But you want to kind of build up so that all of the email service providers know you're not doing anything suspicious. This is all pretty good, above board stuff. And so that's what your goal is there, is get high opens, maybe some replies, but avoiding unsubscribes or no responses. There's a little bit back and forth. Yeah. So sending messages, direct messages and sending emails is a great way to just say, like, hey, I want your attention. I'm also checking in over here, right? Like if I was to do outreach to a marketer, I'd say, hey, I'm going to send you an email. Maybe I'll even send you, like, call you, and maybe I'll send you a LinkedIn connection. Like my goal isn't to connect in every place. It's just, I want you to see that I'm interested in talking to you, right? And I have to know, okay, you've seen me, you're not interested in talking. Okay, that's fine. So trying different things. Yeah, a little bit with maybe what's in the body, Mihaela. You just want to break that down a little bit further. Yeah, words to avoid. Hi, my name is this in emails could be a red flag for spam. But you can also look at different email resources there. One other question that we had here were, do brands still ask the influencer? Yes, that is expected and normal. Now, the scope of the contract, and we'll get into this a little bit when it comes to building a compelling offer, what you're asking for is really going to vary. I was talking to somebody actually yesterday that works with a lot of micro influencers. If you're going through an agency or the person has an agent, expect that they want a contract and they're going to redline it. They're going to redline it for no reason. That's just what happens. But they expect a contract because the value for a contract is that both parties know what we're expecting to get. We know when you're going to deliver. We know what we have rights to use in the future. And so that is a pretty normal thing. Now, if you're just doing a product giveaway, if you're just doing payout of an affiliate offer, it becomes a little bit less critical. Maybe it's more like a click to agree type contract. But if it's a fixed fee, it's more normal than not for there to be a contract. And there's standard terms out there, basic terms that you can use. So after having meetings, This is a good question. Creators tend to disappear. Some of the creators agree to create, but they don't really commit. Do you have any tactics to address this? So this is a typical even sales challenge. And so what you want to do as the brand, when you're working with a creator and you're talking to them, you want to establish, here are what we would see as next steps. We want to do this by this date. And you need to know, this is when we want to have this date. So why don't we connect again in a week after you've had a chance to digest what we're thinking about, and you just give us our feedback. But let's go ahead and put something on the calendar to discuss, and just hop on another quick meeting, get their feedback, right? If this is something where you're going to invest 10 grand working with this influencer that has 150,000 followers, it's worth everybody's time to have another meeting. But it's up to you, the brand, to say, we're going to agree to this, right? We're going to put this in place. We're going to go ahead and hold it. We can move it if we need to. We can cancel if we need to. But let's go ahead and get a meeting down so that our schedules don't fill up. Because what's probably happening is their schedules are just filling up with other things to do, and they probably just lose this in the shuffle. Now, if you're offering, a $50,000 partnership for somebody that, isn't earning or deserving of $50,000, you're probably not going to lose them in the offer. But if you're pretty comparable, they're talking to lots of other people, they might just lose track of you. And so putting in those touch points, here's when we want to do this, here's when we would want to connect again, and providing those deadlines very, very directly from the beginning sort of sets the expectation for them as the influencer, how this is going to work. And then are they ghosting me, or are they just, busy? What's happening here? But they'll have to decline that invitation. Maybe they just no show, but that's the best way I've seen for sort of controlling that process, is letting them know up front, we'd like to do these things. What do you think? Let's go ahead and put this date down to talk again. We can go through the contract, or we can send it to your legal team, and then we'll plan by this date to have the information back, right? Being very, very concrete with those steps is really, really important. Try to avoid, you'll get back to me. Okay, sounds great, right? Because they just simply won't, because they're busy. You really want to have specific steps. Even if they say, I really want to do this, if they don't have dates, you don't really have some understanding of when and what they're going to post, it's not going to happen. You need all of those things to know they're going to produce what you want. And I think that might do it for questions. I'll do one last sort of call for questions while I'm waiting for somebody to type. I'm just going to stall a little bit. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, everybody who's joining the sort of like rewatch a little bit later. Again, looking forward to 2 weeks from now, we'll be diving a little bit deeper. And then 4 weeks from now, we'll be talking about building that inbound engine. But feel free to send along your questions. Thank you again, everybody, for joining me today, and we'll talk soon.